There are 230 pyramids standing in the Sudanese desert right now. Not ruins. Not suggestions of pyramids. Pyramids. Fully constructed, architecturally sophisticated, historically documented pyramids, more than twice the number that exist in all of Egypt. And the overwhelming majority of people watching this video have never once been told that fact. Not in school. Not in a museum. Not in a documentary on any major streaming platform. The Kingdom of Kush built an empire that stretched across Northeast Africa for over 1,000 years. They conquered Egypt, crowned their kings as pharaohs, and raised more pyramids than any civilization in human history. Archaeologists have known this since 1821. They wrote it down. They catalogued it. And then, with the deliberate quiet of people who understood exactly what they were doing, they filed it away. This is the story of what was built, who built it, and why the world was never supposed to know. To understand what happened in the Nubian desert, you have to go back to a place called Meroe, a city that sat along the eastern bank of the Nile in what is now northern Sudan, roughly 200 kilometers northeast of modern Khartoum. This was not a frontier settlement. This was not a satellite colony of some greater power. Meroe was a capital city of staggering scale, the heartbeat of the Kushite Empire during its most powerful era, operating continuously from approximately 300 BC through 350 CE, a span of nearly 7 centuries during which Rome rose, peaked, and began its collapse. At the height of Meroitic civilization, the city contained royal palace complexes, iron smelting furnaces advanced enough that archaeologists have called the area the Birmingham of ancient Africa, and a necropolis of steep-sided pyramids stretching across the desert landscape like a statement carved in stone. Before Meroe, the earlier Kushite capitals of Napata and Kama were already centuries old. Kama, located near the third cataract of the Nile in northern Sudan, is one of the oldest urban centers in sub-Saharan Africa, with radiocarbon dating placing its major occupation as far back as 2500 BC, contemporaneous with the Old Kingdom of Egypt, when the Great Pyramids at Giza were still being constructed. The Nubians were not watching history happen from a distance. They were participants in history from the very beginning. The Kingdom of Kush produced figures whose names deserve to be spoken in the same breath as Ramesses, Caesar, and Alexander, and in some cases, those names belong in conversations those men were never bold enough to enter. Consider Pianki, also recorded as Pi, the Kushite king who in approximately 728 BC launched a military campaign northward into Egypt with an army that ancient records describe as disciplined, vast, and deeply motivated by religious and political purpose. Pianki did not raid Egypt. He conquered it. City by city, nome by nome, fortress by fortress, he pushed northward until the last remaining Egyptian ruler submitted. The victory stele he erected, a granite monument over 6 feet tall, now held in the Cairo Museum and rarely promoted in mainstream discussions, describes in detail the submission of Egyptian princes and kings before a black African sovereign. Pianki established the 25th dynasty of Egypt, a line of Kushite pharaohs who ruled the Nile Valley from Khartoum to the Mediterranean delta. His successors, Sheboka, Shebitku, Tahaka, and Tantimoni, governed what was at that moment the largest empire on earth. Tahaka in particular is a figure of almost mythological significance. He is mentioned in the Bible, in the Book of Kings, where he is described as coming to the aid of Jerusalem against the Assyrian king Sennacherib. He built temples at Karnak and at Jebel Bakr. He commissioned structures across the length of the Nile Valley. He is depicted in surviving sculpture with the double Urias Cobra, the symbol reserved for rulers of both Egypt and Kush, on his brow. His pyramid still stands at Nuri in northern Sudan. It is approximately 65 meters at its base. It was constructed with interior chambers of breathtaking precision. And for most of Western academic history, he was treated as a peripheral footnote to Egyptian civilization rather than recognized as one of the most powerful rulers Africa, or the world, had ever produced. The economic reality of the Kushite Empire is where the suppression becomes truly criminal, because the numbers tell a story that dismantles centuries of invented narrative. The kingdom of Kush sat at the crossroads of two of the ancient world's most profitable trade networks. To the north ran the Nile corridor connecting sub-Saharan Africa to the Mediterranean world. To the east, overland routes connected Kush to the Red Sea ports, from which goods moved into the Arabian Peninsula, Persia, and the Indian subcontinent. The commodities that flowed through Kushite territory were not marginal goods. They were the foundations of ancient wealth. Gold, first and most importantly, the region of Nubia derives its very name from the ancient Egyptian word Nub, meaning gold. Egyptian records from the New Kingdom period document annual tribute payments from Nubia of thousands of gold rings and gold dust, with some scholars estimating that Nubian gold accounted for more than 80% of Egypt's entire gold supply during certain dynasties. Ivory moved through Kushite markets in quantities that made the empire indispensable to Mediterranean luxury trade. Ebony, which commanded extraordinary prices in Egypt and later in Rome, came south from Kushite-controlled forest. Exotic animals, lions, leopards, giraffes, elephants, passed through Kushite handlers on their way to the courts of foreign kings who paid premium prices to demonstrate their access to the wonders of the African interior. Iron production at Meroe was industrial in scale, with slag heaps excavated by archaeologists that suggest the city was producing iron continuously for centuries at volumes that would have made it one of the most significant metallurgical centers in the ancient world. When Rome was expanding its territory across North Africa and into the Middle East, Kush was not a subordinate power trembling at the edges of Roman influence. In 25 BC, Roman forces under the prefect Gaius Petronius invaded Kushite territory and sacked the city of Napata. The Kushite response was led by a queen, a Kandake, the title given to Kushite queen mothers who held military and political authority, and she counterattacked so effectively that Rome ultimately agreed to a peace treaty in which Roman tribute demands were dropped entirely. The Romans, who extracted tribute from nearly every power they touched in that era, paid nothing to Kush. That is not the behavior of a peripheral civilization. That is the behavior of a power Rome understood it could not afford to antagonize. The suppression of this history was not accidental. It was architectural. When European explorers and archaeologists arrived in Sudan in the 19th century, they arrived carrying the intellectual infrastructure of an era devoted to justifying the racial hierarchies that made colonialism morally palatable. Johann Ludwig Burckhardt reached the Nubian sites in 1813. The Italian explorer Follini physically dynamited the tops of Nubian pyramids in 1834, searching for treasure and destroying irreplaceable structural data in the process. His behavior was neither condemned nor criminalized by European institutions that would have treated similar destruction of Greek or Roman monuments as a civilizational atrocity. The artifacts he extracted from the pyramid of Queen Amanishakito, including gold jewelry of extraordinary craftsmanship, were eventually acquired by museums in Munich and Berlin. Those pieces are in European collections today. The pyramid that contained them was never fully restored. When major Western museums constructed their ancient world galleries throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, the curatorial choices made in those spaces were not neutral. Egyptian civilization received entire wings. Nubian and Kushite civilization received cases, sometimes shared cases, sometimes footnotes to Egyptian exhibits, consistently framed as derivative of or secondary to Egyptian achievement rather than parallel, independent, and in several measurable ways more enduring. The Smithsonian, the British Museum, the Louvre, all hold Kushite and Meroitic artifacts that remain in storage, unexhibited, uncatalogued in publicly accessible databases, invisible to the millions of visitors who walk their halls each year and live believing that monumental African civilization began and ended at the Giza Plateau. The scholar Bruce Trigger wrote extensively about this distortion. The Sudanese archaeologist Salah Omar Ali has spent decades arguing for greater international attention and resources for Meroitic excavation sites. The work exists. The evidence exists. The decision not to amplify it is a decision made in editorial meetings, funding committees, and exhibition planning rooms where certain stories are treated as more universally valuable than others. What this means in the present tense is not abstract. Representation in historical narrative